You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives for part 5 of our Obi-Wan Kenobi Retrospective. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and with me, as always, for the Obi-Wan Kenobi Retrospective, my steadfast and stalwart co-host, Marty Aleman. Marty, here we finally made it. We made it to part 5. we made it to the flashbacks.
We made it. Hello, everyone.
We did it. Yeah, man, this episode is so good. This episode is so good. This is really, I think, like where sort of like the heart of the whole story is in this one. We get so much of Anakin's perspective on it, which is funny because it's a series about Obi-Wan, but it's the episode that sort of like turns with Anakin's character um that I think we like. This is where we get the meat that we needed sort of earlier in the series, in order to kind of bring it all together. And I say that not saying that I had a problem obviously with any of the other episodes, because I love the whole series, but we get here and then all of a sudden it's like, this is what we've been driving at, right? Like this is what it's all been about, because we get Obi-Wan's resolve, right? He's finally Obi-Wan Kenobi again. In the scene when he addresses everybody in the facility, right, with their plan. We get the reveal of what Reva is actually after, right? And meanwhile, throughout the entire episode, we're getting Anakin's basically inner monologue as he recalls this last training session with Obi-Wan before they go to Geonosis, basically, right? Like that's, or not before Geonosis, but like you can kind of imagine that this is like within the day or two before Padme shows up and everything goes to hell and the Clone Wars start, right?
Yeah.
And so like this is sort of like the last major lesson I think that Obi-Wan teaches him, because after this point, after he loses his arm and all of that stuff, it's like, well, he's a Jedi Knight at that point, right? So I know that in the books and stuff that there's different points. There's contested about when Anakin becomes a Jedi Knight, but I would say that based on the movies and the Clone Wars TV show, it is very clear that after the Battle of Geonosis, Anakin is considered a knight. He moves forward, but anyways, yeah. How did you feel about this episode?
To be completely honest, rewatching it now, I realized as I was watching it that I feel like this was actually the episode that I remembered the least. I remember the broad strokes about it. Obviously the flashbacks, the intercutting, the reveal of Reva, the amazing fight sequence at the end of the episode with Reva and Vader. But overall, like the details and who spoke to whom, what led to what, all those little details, I didn't remember, which doesn't happen to me often. So I don't remember if I've actually seen this one more than once before this rewatch right here. So that was kind of an interesting reveal for me. I did remember liking it, but I just remember as I was watching it, like, why does Reva turn, like what's her reason for turning? And I like, is there a moment where she speaks to Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan does the negotiator tactic to her? Like as I was watching, it's like, what's gonna happen? I was actually on the edge of my seat with a couple moments here, like, how is this
Trying
gonna
to
happen?
remember.
Yeah. And then like there's a moment where he hands off the communicator and the lightsaber to
To Rogan?
to Haja,
Yeah, Taja.
and he goes and does the negotiator thing, and I'm like, what's gonna happen? I don't remember this. So, but it was all fun, and I was greatly enjoying it, and because there's that thing there, when I was rewatching it, I'm like, again, I know what happens with Reva, and she's actually out to go and get Vader. But as this is happening, as this is unfolding within the first few minutes, she's going down there with the battalion to take out the Path and Obi-Wan. And it's like, what is her motivation? Vader's right there, or like, so. Like, I was happy that basically through the course of the episode, it is Obi-Wan that kind of sheds that light towards her, and basically, like, it's almost more, it's like the motivation's there, but her own fear is getting in the way of
Mm-hmm.
confronting Vader. And Obi-Wan, for better or for worse, kind of has her go through that and face that fear. So I was really I was into it this whole time doing this rewatch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I like I said, like this is kind of when we start to get, like at the meat of these characters and what's going on with them, right? And Reva's whole motivation up until this point has been kind of unclear, other than just like power, right? Like we're just like, okay, this is just another Sith that wants power, right? Like we're just doing this again. But
Right.
then we get to a certain point in this episode where it's like that's not what this is about. Actually, like it's a different Sith storyline. This one's revenge, right? And we get some of that great stuff of the, like, where were you while he was killing us, right? And we get Obi-Wan's guilt of all of that, and all of those things happening. And yeah, for me, it just all really really works. I think this episode is sort of when it all, and it has to, because we're going into the finale, right? And the finale is mostly just about a fight and a chase. So I don't know. There's not a lot to say next week, I feel like. That might change after I rewatch it, but I like we'll have lots to say about the series overall, I think. But in terms of like the actual mechanics of the episode, so much of that episode is the fight. But for this one, it's like this is such a quiet episode for the first half of it until they breach the wall, right?
Mhm.
And then it gets pretty crazy, and there's some stuff that happens. But yeah, it's this is an episode about characters, and and for me that's why it really works. But I think that's also why, like what happens in this episode is not as important as why things are happening. So I think that's probably why, like, you don't really remember specifics,
For sure.
right? Like
It's
you don't have like that sort of mechanical memory of it, like last week of like the rescue mission. It's like, oh yeah, and then they go down in the thing, and then they see the people trapped in amber, and then they rescue, right? Like it's like there's very much like a sequence of events in that one, whereas this one has sort of a lot of stuff. Sort of, we go back and forth, right? Because we get the moment of him at the door having the conversation with Reva, and then we get the moment of him surrendering and having a conversation with Reva, right? And
right.
they're similar but not the same. Um, so yeah, like it's one of, I don't know, but at the same time, I feel like this will probably be our shortest episode, um, because I don't know, as much as I really like everything that happens. We've kind of at this point in the series of the podcast talked about a lot of this stuff already,
For sure.
and then this is the episode that just kind of reinforces a lot of that, um and really just sort of like where things kind of culminate, right? There's not a lot to say about the fact that Obi-Wan is resolved here, right? We saw him come back into his own in the course of the last episode, so we kind of know that that's where we're going, right? And so when we get the scene where everybody's scared, and it's like, and the doors won't open, and he makes his speech of like, we can't beat them, but if we can hold them off long enough, we can escape. Everybody can get out, right? and that's what, like, we see Obi-Wan Kenobi come back for the first time. That's the Obi-Wan from the Clone Wars, right? Like, that's the Obi-Wan from the prequel trilogy
Right.
before he became broken. So, like, it's there's not a lot to say about that other than all that other stuff that we talked about. We were right, and here we are now, right? Which is great. The great thing about doing the series in hindsight and not as they're coming out is that we already know that. So, but yeah, so I don't know. It's a bit of a funny episode to pull apart and dissect. Um, I think for me, the one thing that I'll want to talk about is probably Tala's storyline and that coming to an end. But was there anything in particular about this episode that stands out for you, having rewatched it?
I mean, you know me, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a video editor by trade. So that's what I gravitate towards when it comes to usually the film language. It's editing and cinematography for the most part. And what can you not say about the editing in this episode? The very nature of the structure of this entire episode is based on this flashback, this cross cutting between the master and the apprentice having a duel via training, and every part of this duel is basically laying out the actual narrative of the story as we go along with it, with also slight callbacks to the previous fight that we had in episode 3, with between Vader and Obi-Wan, those huge strikes from overhead with Anakin hitting, Obi-Wan, and he's on the floor blocking it. It's very reminiscent of what exactly happened in episode 3. Episode 3 of
Mm.
Obi-Wan, not Revenge of the Sith, episode 3, to be clear. But no, just overall, I really just love the cross-cutting, literally, between the present and the past. Um, there was some slight de-aging, which is I think was pretty effective, even though you could obviously tell that the actors have aged since in 20 years since the last time that they were in these actual costumes in these roles. um I kind of felt also it's kind of funny to me because there's this kind of unofficial kind of, I guess, tradition in the prequels where you could always tell when they did reshoots because of Ewan's hair. And I kind of
Hmm.
felt like his hair, I don't think it was on purpose or anything, but his hair in this scene actually resembles his reshoot hair in Attack of the Clones, which I
It
appreciated.
does, yeah, yeah.
So it's like even the inconsistencies are consistent in this episode. But overall, in the actual present of the episode, I love how we're seeing Vader's lack of patience, just as he was in that flashback. And I'm going to miss Tala for sure. I mean, she basically has 3 episodes to shine in, and uh, we even get a moment with her where that's the only part of the episode where it felt like it slowed down. And it's when, because everything's hectic throughout the entire course of this episode, and Obi-Wan gets that message from Bail Organa, and Tala goes there, and then she has her kind of last real scene before the action happens. And so it's almost like foreshadowing a little bit of what's going to happen with her, but doesn't make it less tragic when it does.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we know just by virtue of not the non-linear storytelling of Star Wars that, like, well, Tala's not really around, so I don't think that she's going to be around, sort of thing, right? But I so kind of get the sense that she's not going to survive. But but yeah, there's an aspect of this character of Tala that I don't really hear anybody talk about that I find very interesting to discuss, which is the idea that she is actually a romantic interest for Obi-Wan, right? I got that vibe very strong in this series.
Mhm.
I don't think that a lot of people are there with me, which I think is really interesting. But I definitely felt chemistry between those two characters. And had Tala survived, the story may have gone very differently, right? That Obi-Wan might not have felt so alone, but that, because she doesn't, he goes back to his solitude on Tatooine and and all of that, right? But that I think that the path forward may have been very different had she survived this episode. So for me, every time I watch it, that's kind of what's going on in my head. That's what I'm thinking about is
Mm.
oh, if only Tala had survived, you know, we might have gotten some other interesting storylines coming about. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I felt it too. Maybe not as strongly as you did, but I did feel there were some moments where they could have gone either way. I appreciate that when it comes to, because how many times do we ever see a moment where there is a actual like connection, romantic connection of some sort, and then that person dies. So I'm happy they didn't go all the way with that, because that will almost would have like kind of tipped the hand a little bit of what they were kind of trying to plan there a little bit. But overall, I think I agree, because yeah, and Dear Varma is just a beautiful woman. So how can you not? And it's Ewan. So there is that aspect, but it's there's already so much in this show that, I mean, there's so much strength. For lack of a better term, there's just so much that this show has when it comes to I guess courage is the right word. There's so much
Hmm.
courage with this show in terms of what Deborah Chow, what the writers have come to, because they're dealing with icons. And maybe this is something we can kind of talk about in this episode, because you're dealing with characters like Obi-Wan, Vader, Luke, Leia, Alderaan, like all these heavy hitters of like Star Wars lore, and they're playing so close to the with so many moments. Like, I mean, I the fact that Obi-Wan leaves Tatooine and goes on this adventure with Princess Leia, and there's all these things that happen in this show that it almost sounds as if it's like a fan, like, oh, what if, wouldn't it be kind of cool if this happens? I don't know, like this show does it so well and with so much confidence and success. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. It is one of the few, I think, stories that can kind of come back and revisit a lot of these, like you said, like iconic characters, but actually like hits the mark. We've talked a lot about Vivian Leigh Blair and the casting there with her as Leia, and then obviously having Ewan reprise his role as Obi-Wan. Um, and then I think we haven't really talked enough yet about Hayden and his performance as Vader,
For sure.
because I really think he does a phenomenal job. We'll talk a lot about it next week, I think, but because that's really when we get to see it the most. But we get to see a lot of Hayden in this episode as Anakin.
Hmm.
There's one great moment in particular where I feel that he really captured the essence of his performance from 2002, when at the end of the training session, Obi-Wan imparts his wisdom, right? He teaches Anakin a lesson,
Hmm.
and Anakin goes from sort or no, it's not even at the end, right? It's the middle of the fight, right? Anakin disarms Obi-Wan and says, you have no weapon, the fight is over. And Obi-Wan just stops and goes, Anakin, you're so focused on victory, right? Like, and then proceeds to school him, right? Like, just like shuts him down. And is like, the duel's not over, right? Like just because you say that the fight is finished, um that doesn't make it finished, right? So, which is great foreshadowing for the next episode, where, I personally think, we'll talk about this next week, I personally think that Vader is like, that Anakin through Vader is like begging Obi-Wan, like, kill me, like, do it, like your
For
friend
sure.
is dead. He's already dead. I killed him. So end me now, because I'm just suffering. That's all I'm doing, right? And Obi-Wan kind of just walks away, right? He's like, just leaves it. But
Right.
was lots to talk about next week with that.
Yeah, we'll
But
save that. Yeah.
yeah,
Agreed,
but
though.
we're kind of foreshadowing that here, right? Of Obi-Wan being like, I beat you. Now let's go get lunch. And Anakin very much not leaving the fight, right? Like it sort of reverses part way through. And that antagonism is what's going to sort of carry through in Attack of the Clones, as the two of them go on their adventures, and have their weird brother father son dynamic play out. But yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy all that flashback stuff so much in this episode because it does give us that opportunity. It does give us that insight, and it's such a bold choice, such a bold choice. But it's one of those instances where it's like, does Hayden Christensen look like a 19-year-old? No, absolutely not. He definitely looks like a man in his 40s pretending to be his 20-year-old self, right? And even like Ewan, it's like, yeah, no, we've put a bunch of makeup on him and that sort of thing. But this is where, like, the story is more important than whatever's on screen,
For
right?
sure.
And by virtue of that, we forgive so much more. Whereas let's juxtapose this with the end of Mandalorian season 2 when Luke shows up, and it's cool. Don't get me wrong, it's rad when Luke shows up. He's mowing through those dark troopers, and it's super radical, right? Like it's a very cool Star Wars moment. Is it thematically as resonant as it could have been? Maybe not. Is it a little bit confusing? I mean, like, this is tough now because we have the larger picture, right? But at the time, for sure, we were looking at that and going like, should Grogu go with Luke, right? um and we're questioning that, right? And the biggest thing that tells me that, like, thematically that scene doesn't work as well as it could is that, like, all we talk about in that episode is how cool Luke was and how bad the de-aging was, right? Like, that episode has a lot in it. That episode of Mando has a lot in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got an incredible fight between Moff Gideon and Mando,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, an incredibly well choreographed fight. It's got all of the awesome moments with his whole squad of badass ladies that he takes with him, right? Like, it's so good, so cool. There's so many great moments in that episode, and yet the thing that we talk about is uh, the bad CG at the end, and the reason why we talk about it is because it kind of rings a little bit hollow, it rings a little bit false. Whereas with this, it's like, yeah, Ewan's hair looks terrible. It looks like the reshoot hair, right? It looks really, really bad, especially after the fight. It's all like sort of disheveled or whatever. It looks really, really bad.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because, like, that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on what they're saying to each other. We're focused on this moment between characters, and we're focused on what that means for Vader. We're focused on what that means for Ben Kenobi, and we're focused on what that means for the future with Luke and Leia, right? Um, and as such, like we let so much slide in comparison to those other stories that we can think of with de-aging, right? I'll give you guys another great example. Tron Legacy, which predates all of this stuff by 10 to 15 years, right? At
Mm-hmm.
this point, 10 to 13, I guess. 2010
Mm-hmm.
is when Tron Legacy came out. The de-aging stuff that they did for Kevin Flynn in that movie, you go back and you watch it now and it's like, ooh boy, it's really bad, right? But they get around it. They use a narrative trick in that, like, we don't see a lot of, like, the actual de-aged Kevin Flynn. We see like a couple minutes at the beginning of the movie, but for the most part it's Clue. And Clue is a digital copy of Kevin Flynn, right?
Right.
So, like, it's one of those things where, like, even though we have actual, like, modern day Jeff Bridges talking to de-aged CG Jeff Bridges, those scenes work because the content of them is phenomenal, the writing is phenomenal in that movie, and we've gone on that journey and all of that, right? But then, like, also we have this great narrative device of, like, there's a reason why he looks like a computer animated character, right? um so it works for us, it's fine. But yeah, like, it's another one of those ones of like the narrative, the story makes up for the failing of the technology, which is why we can go back and we can watch Return of the Jedi, and we don't need, you know, the modern special effects. We can get away with the special effects as they are.
Right.
Um, and like, well, like, it's fine, right? Um,
Real
it's
fast
because
about
the story holds it up, not the special effects, right?
for sure.
Whereas I think sometimes nowadays we end up leaning into the special effects and expect that to prop up a bad story. Um, like, I don't know how well the Fast and Furious movies will hold up in 30 years, right?
Yeah.
They're super fun right now, but, are they really that great to go back and watch? Fast 5 is, but like, as a franchise in general, is it? Or is it just a fun roller coaster ride that whenever a new one comes out, let's go, right? Which is very different, from what we want from, like, a Star Wars. But then we get a Star Wars that is mostly spectacle and special effects in the Rise of Skywalker, and I think that most of us could take it or leave it. Even the people who like Rise of Skywalker, it is like a take it or leave it and experience that they have with it. I don't know anybody who's gonna fight to defend that is their favorite Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? And it's because, like, the the character stuff's not there. The narrative stuff isn't there as much as it's just like, well, now they're fighting on the Death Star because I guess that's kind of cool, and now they're riding horses on a Star Destroyer because that's a neat idea, right? Like, it's um yeah, I think that JJ learned the wrong lessons from the way that George makes Star Wars movies, because we go back to the prequels and we go back to the way that George made those movies, and I love watching those documentaries and watching him walk in and go through the concept art, right? And he would have his stamp and he would just put, like, yep, good, yep, good, yep, good. And I don't know. I've seen a lot of criticism from that over the years. People talking about it's like, oh, well, that's why they're, like the story is not as blah blah blah. And it's like, well, the story in the prequels is actually really good. The performances are a little bit flat because George didn't pay attention to the actors, but the story is actually very solid. It's just, some of the editing and some of the performances just don't support it. But there's a
Right.
great aspect of the way that George looks at movies and making movies and the visual medium of it, in that, like, what he had said, and I think that Doug Chang talks about this. I think it was Doug Chang that this is attributed to, is that, like, that first time that George came in and was just like, this one, this one, this one, and then Doug started asking questions of, like, yeah, but why? And, like, it's like, um George's explanation for why he made the choices that he made, why he picked the stuff that he picked, was like, we don't, like, this is only going to be on screen for 30 seconds total. The audience has to know exactly what it is visually, right? Like, they need to be able to see it and and know it instantly, that that's the engine and that's the cockpit and that's, right, like, blah blah blah. Like, it just has to communicate without us explaining what it is, right? Like, you
Hmm.
look at the Millennium Falcon and you know which part's the front, you know which part's the cockpit, you know which part's the engine and how it's going to fly, right? You can just picture it the second that you see that ship, the second that you see an X-wing, the second that you see a Naboo starfighter or the pod racers. I mean, you see the pod racers and you look at them and you go, those things are fast. Why? Because they are literally just a seat and gigantic engines, like starship engines attached to a sled, right? And so it's like, instantly we know exactly what those are. I think that JJ kind of looked at that and went, oh, okay, so like the visuals are the most important part of this. The sequences are the most important part, right? And so he put those movies together, Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker, like suffers from it more. Because I think that, I mean, like, you've got Lawrence Kasdan writing your dialogue for that first one, so it's that dialogue sings as opposed to Chris Terrio's dialogue, which is just
Boo.
a wet fart. But I you have his power, right? Like crap like that.
Yeah.
I and then Ben Solo not saying a single word. Just great screenwriting choices like that.
No, he said
And a
ow.
Kamehameha blast and all that. They just focused on, we've talked about this, right? They just focused on like, oh, and then she's got two lightsabers at the end so that she can do this, right? So that she can just Kamehameha blast him. And so now we have to explain at some point why she has a second lightsaber, and we have to do this and we have to do that. They wrote the movie in reverse. Like, it just drives me nuts. How does this all relate back into Obi-Wan Kenobi? We were talking about the de-aging and stuff.
Talking about the visual effects and the de-aging. And real fast, I wanted to slightly
Yeah.
go back real fast when you were mentioning Tron Legacy. And I always go back to this notion of what filmmakers don't do anymore. And this is finally my platform, and I could go on a soapbox for a second about current filmmakers and with this de-aging technology, which I'm generally a fan of. I think Marvel has actually done it relatively well. They do it sparingly, and as of late, there's been more instances where it's been like, hey, it's getting better. It's still not perfect, but it's getting better. Going back to Tron Legacy, though, one thing that it suffers from in the very, very beginning, because you could always argue that notion of Clue is a digital character in the story, so that works. But in the very beginning, you got a moment between father and son, and he's speaking to him as his younger self. And the very first shot that you see him, it's a beautiful reveal because I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's just to indulge me for a second. The camera kind of wraps around, and the light source of the shot is from behind. So Kevin Flynn is for the most part in silhouette, so it kind of works. But the final moment of that scene, he's leaving Sam Flynn's bedroom, and before he turns and closes the door, there is a huge light source right on his face, and that is what kills the magic trick, if you will. And what filmmakers just don't do anymore is what Spielberg did in Jaws with Bruce the Shark, if you will. You got to hide Bruce the Shark as unless it's working for you, hide it. So in these cases, I feel like the filmmakers are almost a little bit too ambitious with this technology, where if you have a character that needs to be younger, like going back to like say Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the first opening scene in that film, you have a similar scene where between a father and a son, where Sean Connery is supposed to be a lot younger. You don't even see his face. You just cut around him. You just
Mm-hmm.
shoot around his
Yeah.
hands and close-ups and stuff. So that was just my little soapbox moment. It doesn't really pertain to the episode, but I just felt like I needed to get that out. We're like, we just need to have a little bit more discipline. And like going back real fast to what you said also about the Mandalorian season 2, it really just, if you really look at it, it's really just one really bad shot, and it's the close-up. It's the final close-up where he says, "May the Force be with you," where he looks down at Grogu, looks up at Mando, says, "May the Force be with you." If you look at all the other shots, I will say they were passable. But that last shot, it's the final shot,
Mm-hmm.
it's the line, it's the close-up. Dude, just don't use it. Don't use that shot.
Yeah,
Just it's hard.
but
It's so hard.
then they come back in season 2 and they're like, what if we did a whole episode with them?
Oh,
No,
Boba Fett, yeah.
not in the next, in Book of Boba Fett, not even in his own show. They come back in Book of Boba Fett and they're like, what if we just have so much Luke?
But they learned their lessons. I mean, so for me, the Luke and Book of Boba Fett, actually, I want to say 95% of the time works. Is it a little stilted and a little bit emotionless? Absolutely. I get that, but only a little bit. I feel like the success rate on Book of Boba Fett Luke is way more.
Oh yeah, it's yeah,
And
they fixed a lot of the problems for sure. But it's still one of those things of like, instead of being clever about it, or just, like, I mean, maybe let's not do this. They just doubled down. They just doubled down and went like, nope, we're just going to work harder on it this time, and it pays off, because I do think that it serves its purpose in that story. But
for sure.
but ultimately, like, this is the thing is, and I think this is what you're kind of getting at, is that it's the Jeff Goldblum line in Jurassic Park, right? Your
Yep,
scientists were
exactly.
so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And the story needs to be the reason that you do it, not the other way around, right? You don't give Rey two lightsabers at the end so that she can have, like, put them in like an X, and then, like, I'm all the Jedi and shoot laser beams at Palpatine, right? That's not, and then work it backwards and go, I guess the other one was Leia's, and then we have to write a whole backstory for how Leia trained as a Jedi until she didn't, and then
Right.
gave Luke her lightsaber, and Luke kept it on Octo the whole time, but didn't mention anything about it in the entire last movie. Um, but now it's important. Now she needs both lightsabers. Why does she need both lightsabers? She doesn't. It just, like, because we have a moment and we're gonna do this thing with Ben, and it's like, okay. So they just, instead of writing the narrative to suit the characters, they wrote the narrative to suit these moments, right? And a
Yep.
lot of it was just like, we have these special effects ideas of what we're gonna do. They started with the concept art. This was what I was sort of getting at with all that stuff about George Lucas, and where JJ gets it wrong. They started with the concept art and what it looks like, and then they wrote stories to fit around that, right? And you can see this in the behind the scenes documentary for Rise of Skywalker, when they're trying to figure out the dagger stuff, and, like, they're writing story to suit the prop that they've pulled out, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and it's got these little things that come out, and he's going like, oh yeah, and then she could do this, and then she could pull this thing out, and then that's how it'll work. And it's like, listen, you guys, if you are figuring out the MacGuffin now, while you're about to shoot, it's too late. And that's why, like, we watched that movie, and I think, even people who love the movie, it's like, defend it, defend the dagger. Somebody out there defend the dagger for me. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. They are just standing on a random hill, looking at a random chunk of debris that the sea has been smashing to smithereens for, like, since Ochi made the dagger, 30 years, right? Like, or maybe
Yeah.
not even 30, maybe 20 years, right? But in any case, long enough, right? Like, it's completely absurd. It makes no sense if you stop and think about it for 2 seconds, which is just another thing that stories are just so guilty of these days. That is one of the things in Obi-Wan. People can criticize whatever they want. They tend to criticize the budget, right? That tends to be the thing. And listen, this episode is where the budget shows the most. Those stormtroopers, all the shots like outside the blast doors, they look like a TV show. They do not look like a movie. But there's a very simple reason for that. There's no depth of field on any of those shots. Somebody was asleep at the wheel on that day, and they just didn't give that any sense of scale. So it looks like you're on a set. It just looks like you have a video camera on a set. Everything is in sharp relief. It's all lit flat.
The
And
lit.
it's just
Yeah. The
it's just
lighting. Sure.
it's funny because it'll switch back and forth between that and the stuff going on inside. And you go inside, and all of a sudden there's this great depth of field that's telling you where to focus your eyes and what we're looking at. There's different pools of light doing different things for different characters, and it all works, right? And it actually looks really great. And then we'll pop to those outdoor scenes. They're not outdoors, it's all in the volume, right? And just, I don't know what happened on that day, but somebody forgot to do some cinematography. They had really cool camera moves in those moments, but there's just zero depth of field. And so, like, it just looks like a fan film. It just looks like a fan film because that's one of those things that inexperienced DPs, they just shoot a clean plate, right? You just you're focused on framing, you're focused on the camera move, but you're not actually focused on focus, which is funny. I
Yeah. It's
actually
definitely
ironic, not a coincidence, like people want to say about that one song, which actually makes that song ironic that the song is called ironic, but nothing in it is ironic. Maybe that was the joke. I don't know. I don't know. You have to ask Alanis Morissette, but it is ironic that the one thing they forgot to focus on was the focus in those scenes, and so it does look really cheap. But that's the one thing that I think that you can criticize this show for. Um, as far as I'm concerned, there are no plot holes in Obi-Wan. There really aren't. Like it all makes perfect sense. Um, one of my favorite things if somebody might try and tell me is a plot hole, but I think it's just Anakin being like top tier Anakin, is when he's like Neil and makes her the Grand Inquisitor, and like Vader knows that that Grande, we don't know his name. We've never gotten a name for that character, but the actual Grand Inquisitor, that he is alive, right? And he's just hanging back. He's just hanging back. I For that reveal at the end, which I love. I love and then the other part of it is like I love the aspect where the Grand Inquisitor is like, uh, you what revenge can be a powerful motivator. I can't remember exactly what he says, but basically that like he stayed alive. She stabbed him, and he stayed alive to see her get stabbed again, or to see her get stabbed. Um,
right.
and then they just walk away from her. They leave her there, and they don't finish the job, and so she survives to get revenge. So I like that. I like that. That's a great loose thread that's out there in the galaxy. That Reva is still out there. We'll talk about that next week. But yeah, I love that moment. The performance on that Rupert Friend in that moment is so good.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's revenge does wonders for the will to live, don't you
that's what
think?
it is. Yeah,
I
yeah.
uh I always have the movie play or the show playing. So I just threw up the subtitles. Yeah, I always had this like thought where in that scene where Vader makes her the Grand Inquisitor, there's almost like this part of me that thinks that the Grand Inquisitor and like a couple of the other, like the fifth brother, are like in the next room, kind of like Impractical Joker style, just like laughing at the camera. You know?
Now pin it on her. Now pin it on her chest.
Yeah,
Hilarious. She thinks she's the Grand Inquisitor.
that's
Yeah.
hilarious. Yeah.
No, it's
So
perfect. It's perfect.
yeah, yeah, it's funny because yeah, the cinematography for sure is flat in those scenes. It almost reminds me of like test footage for the volume for like season 1 of The Mandalorian, you know. But now overall, like getting off that whole topic, I mean, we have the path and everyone's escaping, and they're I- Leia is has her little subplot where she's trying to open the doors, and you got the evil Lola, and that was a cute little moment where she gets the door adorable restraining bolt off of
Yeah.
Lola. And my daughter has her own little Lola, so when we were watching it today, she was just like, is that where she had it at? Just with her own Lola, which is great. But yeah, the how does Reva's motivation track for you? Um, do you buy it? Do you not buy it? I'm pretty sure you do, but I'm curious what you feel about her whole motivation. I think it's kind of left a little bit ambiguous with what happens during Order 66. Like, I feel like she does get stabbed, but then it's like she doesn't die, and she just stays with the rest of the unfortunate younglings in the Jedi Temple. Like, how, and the whole motivation of her like plan. Like, how do you feel about it?
I love it. I love it. And the aspect of it like being a bad plan and not working out, I think is perfect. I mean, like she is um she is a child, right? She's a very powerful child, but yeah, and even though she is physically an adult, she is stuck in that moment. And so all of her motivations are the motivations of, I don't know, how old would you say she is? She's like a 10, 11, 12 year old, something like that.
Yeah.
So they're all the motivations of a child, of a scared child. And everything that she's done up until this point fits into that. What we talked about last week with her, like, sort of, like those unhinged moments where she sort of loses control, right? And we'll see even more of it next week. But it all speaks to that trauma, and like that she is still stuck in that trauma. And I really like that. I think that that's really powerful,
Right.
because that's what it's about. Like, that's what her story is about that trauma that she's stuck in, and Obi-Wan eventually helping her get through that, and her trauma helping Obi-Wan get through his, right? So, like, dealing with that forces him into a situation where he has to deal with his. So, yeah, I don't know, and I think it's a cool reveal, and it's very, yeah, I mean, it's very Sith, it's very Star Wars. This is what the dark side does. So she's bent on revenge, um, but then is naive and blinded by that, and so she doesn't see that, like, Vader is 10 steps ahead of her. And I think that's the other cool thing that it does, is that it really places Vader at this point in the timeline into an important place, because the next time that we see him is going to be, I mean, yeah, in Rogue One, but in A New Hope, and then in Empire, and we see him as a commanding presence and as intelligent, right? Like, and thoughtful, and not necessarily the brash, cocky kid that he was when he went into the armor. So
Sure.
in these 10 years, he's learned a lot. And I think, not by choice, right, but by circumstance, he's learned a lot, and he's become a more evolved version of Anakin. And this scene, like, those scenes really show it off, but that he is still evil, that he's still messing with her, right? Uh, but that he is not as, um and I think it's kind of expecting us to feel that way, that Vader, because that's what Obi-Wan is saying, right? Is that, like, oh, all he'll see is me, right? And I think Obi-Wan's underestimating him at that point, and thinking of
Right.
Anakin, right? And not of Vader. Because Vader has been through it and isn't going to get burnt again, right? Like, that's kind of the reality. So,
Mm. Yeah.
um yeah. Yeah, that's sort of, I don't know.
Yeah. That's like
That
the
answers
I
your
mean,
question, right? That answers your question
oh
about
yeah,
Reva?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like when it comes to Vader, it's like when it comes to, say, the way we the fans kind of see Vader is like his apex is probably like Empire Strikes Back, for example, and that comes from years, say, like, give or take, like 13 years after this moment, and at that point Vader is in full control, and he's also removed the Obi-Wan of it all because he's been dead for about 3 years at that point. So there's a lot of like preconceived notions that we come with, with just the idea of Vader, but then like we're still dealing with technically a younger Vader, if you will, where
Hmm.
he's a little bit more like brash, like Anakin was. So I love seeing that kind of put together because I mean, in episode 3 of Obi-Wan, where we see him stalking in the village as, just this evil presence who has a little bit of that. But then through the course of this show, we're seeing that he's kind of almost reverting back to it. And we're seeing it because I think their flashbacks are also not just for our purposes, and obviously, but I think it's also coming from not just Vader, but also Obi-Wan. So it's like they're both kind of having this kind of shared experience where, because like there's a couple moments where when it cuts back to the present, it's not just always cutting back to Obi-Wan. There's moments where from the flashbacks, it cuts back to Vader as well. So it's to show that that they're both kind of remembering their master and the apprentice just in how they handle battle. But yeah, um, The fight at the end is fantastic. I love how, for lack of a better term, he just schools her the entire time, and it's not a short fight, which I appreciate, but it's at this point it's Vader at his most. Just, I'm going to pick the wings off this fly because I just lost Obi-Wan, so now I'm going to take it out on you, Reva. So
Mm.
I really appreciated that, and the the disrespect of not even using his own blade. It's just fantastic how he just tosses back one of her blades back to her. They fight for a little bit. The just the aggressive force pull of the second blade at the end of the fight is just fantastic. So it's just little stuff that I loved in the choreography. Um, but and it's also like a teaser to what's going to happen in the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great fight. He just toys with her, right? It's got a lot of shades of the beginning of the fight in Empire when he's just
Mhm.
one-handed fighting Luke and just kind of like, this is all I need to finish you, and like the all too easy, right? Perhaps you're not as strong as the Emperor thought, sort of thing.
Right.
Um and again, I like similar because they're underestimating Reva and revenge and the will to live and all of that. But yeah, yeah, such a great fight sequence, so well choreographed. Um, and then like sort of along like juxtaposed with the training stuff that we talked about earlier, right? Like it's just
Mm.
it's really good. It's really good because it shows that like what Anakin will say in the next episode, I am what you made me, right?
Mm.
Obi-Wan is responsible for Vader. He is responsible for both the good and the bad of Vader. And that is a complicated mixed bag because it's like the things that made Anakin were due in large part to Vader to Obi-Wan, but then like so many of those aspects continue on in Darth Vader. And Obi-Wan is responsible for him being able to do many of the things that he can do. And obviously Anakin uses those to do cruel and unspeakable things to people all over the galaxy. And so, like there's a like sort of the double edge on that. And I love that. I love that aspect of it. But it's so when we get that scene in A New Hope where Obi-Wan is like, Vader was once a pupil of mine before he turned to the dark side, right? Like it has so much
Mm.
meaning
I like that.
because
Yeah.
of this show and because of moments like this where it's like we see the flashback, Anakin has not learned the lesson, and then we see this fight at the end that mirrors that battle, right? Obi-Wan pulling the lightsaber out of Anakin's hand and being like, the fight's done, I win, right?
Hmm.
Um, Vader doing the same thing to Reva, and it's like at the end he's got the two lightsabers and he's like, we're done here, right? And he is teaching her a lesson in the same way that Obi-Wan was teaching him a lesson, but he's a dark reflection of his former master. And so it's evil the way that he teaches his lesson, which is to murder her, right? Like, or seemingly like his perception is that he has killed her. So yeah,
Do
it's
does that whole thing track with you? Because that's always kind of bumped with me too. Because of course we know the reason why she has to stay alive for the next episode and what happens there.
mhm.
But not always, but it's like I slightly struggle with the fact that this is the second time that Vader has dispatched her and she's still alive. That being said, I remember when I was watching it and I did remember like, well, Darth Maul survived. So it's
Well,
like,
I mean, it's what it's. I think it's the reason why the Grand Inquisitor says what he says,
yeah.
right? Because we turn around and go like, it's the arrogance of the Sith, right? And that's like that to me is it's a little hand wavy, but it is also your overconfidence is your weakness,
Mhm.
Always. This is a consistency with all of the Sith. Is that like that is how like that's how they operate. They think they're in control, right? But what do we know from Jurassic Park? That's the illusion. You never had control,
Mhm.
right? So it's it's actually in terms of like both the Sith code and the Jedi code. There is no um there is no chaos, only peace. I think is what it says in the Jedi code. I and the Sith code is about I like through like my fear I gain strength, and my strength I gain power, and with power I gain control, and with control I break my chains, right? Like it's not word for word, but it's like that's what the Sith code is, right?
Right.
um it's so libertarian, it's hilarious. But I it like it, that is essentially like the message there is like that's what the Sith believe, is that that control is their freedom. And what they don't understand, they always fail to understand, is that no matter what, because their ideology is rooted in fear, they are always controlled by their fear. And Anakin's greatest fear is not being strong enough, and so
Mhm.
he will always have hubris. So like that overconfidence thing is just, it's always going to be there, because his greatest fear is not having power, not having control, not being able to save his mother, not being able to save Padme, right? Not having control. It's yeah, and yet like they think because they are the Sith and they are in control of the dark side that they have control. And it's like, no, but the dark side controls you. Palpatine controls you, but the dark side controls Palpatine. None of you have freedom. You are all slaves to the dark side and to your own fears, right? Like, and you need to do that in order to maintain the power structure that you have. You have to do that. And then with the Jedi, it's the opposite. And this is where Qui-Gon and then Obi-Wan at this point become transcendent, and Luke in Return of the Jedi become transcendent beyond the Jedi Order, and become like actual Jedi, not Jedi Knights, not Jedi Masters, but just what was originally written in the script was Jedi Bendu, right? Is what they were originally called.
Right.
Where the Jedi have a similar illusion that that peace is what they're after. It's in the Jedi code. It's everything's about peace and harmony, and that's the light side. But the reality of it, and what Luke discusses in The Last Jedi, is that's not what it is. It's balance, right? That's the Jedi's perception of the Force. It's a different type of power and a different type of control that they cannot have, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the reality is that like to be truly at peace is to allow things to happen. And that's where Obi-Wan not killing Vader at the end of the next episode again, and it mirrors this other thing. Vader has the arrogance of thinking that he's won, that he's taught his lesson. Reva is defeated. The third sister is no more. And then the Grand Inquisitor drops his little taunt at the end of like farewell Grand Inquisitor or whatever he says, right? And like they it's I just love how much of a little lackey he is in that moment.
Totally.
um he's yeah, it's anyways. um it's like Biff and his and his little cohort in Back to the Future,
Yeah, Billy
especially
Zane
in
and the
part
guy with
two.
the 3D glasses and all
Yeah,
them.
yeah, like his little gang, and he's got his little minions like, hey, and Biff is like, shut up guys, right? And they stop. It's so much like that. I love it. I but he walks away thinking like, I've made my point. I've done what I've done. She's dead. Like, what's she gonna do? She's got no way off of this planet. She's got no one to help her. She's alone in the dirt. She's dead. right? Because we know what happened with the Grand Inquisitor is that the fifth brother was also on Dayu and was on his way there, right? So like he got there as soon as she was like, oh, he died. Obi-Wan did it, and then the fifth brother was sneaking around behind Reva's back and
Man, I kind of
all
wish he
that.
was in this episode now. Just
Yeah,
in this scene would have been nice.
it would have been nice if he was also there, if he was just also so that
Yeah.
we know that he's in on it. But whatever, it's not a big deal.
No, it's not going to hurt the show or anything, but I don't think we
Yeah,
see him anymore. I don't think we see any of the other Inquisitors moving forward.
no, I don't think so either. But yeah. So the next episode, Obi-Wan leaves Anakin alive. It's very much like the Force is going to do what it's going to do, right? Like he just kind of walks away and he goes, "It's not my story anymore. This is about Luke and Leia." And one of them, I mean, in his mind, Luke will be the one to do this, right? So um I think that there's just peace and purpose there, right? So it's anyways, we'll talk more about that next week, but that's
For
that's
sure.
sort of my take on it.
For sure. Yeah, I have the Jedi Code and the Sith Code up in my room, so I was, if you needed to, I was fully prepared to recite it for you. But I think you made your point, though, so you're good.
Yeah, doesn't need to be verbatim, right? But
No, of
it's
course,
the
no.
it's the
Everything you
essence of
said
it,
would,
right?
yeah, everything you said tracks basically, and
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's always like the Jedi have their view, the Sith have their view, and it's it's balance. It always goes back to balance. It's
yeah.
like exactly what you said. So,
They're
one
both
of my
wrong. They're both wrong. And like one of my favorite Star Wars stories is not a canon story. It's actually a very silly one. And it's from an issue of Star Wars Tales, which was like an anthology comic series back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I guess it was probably just early 2000s. But actually, no, maybe not, because it might have been like 98, 99. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but it came out after. I guess it was after '99 because this one's after the Phantom Menace. There's a great comic where Mace and Yoda are having lunch in a diner on Coruscant. It's meant to be reminiscent of the scene in Pulp Fiction. I like it. That's the gag, and they're having this discussion about Anakin and about the chosen one, right? Um, and Mace sort of being like, "Do you think that he's the chosen one? Like, do you think like is this the prophecy? He'll bring balance to the Force. Like what do you think about this? What about this? What about the Sith that Qui-Gon says? And like what does this all mean?" And Yoda's like, he could bring balance to the Force if we believe the prophecy of the chosen one. Then it's true. He could bring balance to the Force, but what does balance mean? And he dumps out, I've told this story so many times on these podcasts, but he dumps out a salt shaker and he goes, these grains of salt, all of this represents the light side, this represents the Jedi, right? Thousands of us, tens of thousands across the galaxy. And then he tips over the pepper shaker, and two little pieces of pepper land on the table, right next to this big pile of salt. And he goes, this represents the dark side, this is the Sith, right? And he waves his hand over it, and all but two of the grains of salt remain, and the two grains of pepper. And he goes, this is balance too, like this is also balance.
mm,
And then it turns into a big like thing of like the person like holding up the diner, and Mace and Yoda stand up with their lightsabers, and again, it's an homage to Pulp Fiction, but like that's sort of the end of the conversation. Is he's like, this is what it could also mean. This is what balance could also mean, and that balance, that's what happens, right? Is that we're left with two Sith, and we're left with Yoda and Obi-Wan, as far as we know, right? In the narrative of the story.
right.
And obviously now we know, like, oh, there's all these other Jedi, but whatever. There are two remaining Jedi of the Order, right? Like they're like these two Jedi. Also, it could represent the twins, right? It could represent Luke and Leia. So if you can look at it that way as well. Like the rest of the Jedi don't count at that point. They're all fallen. It's the Order has fallen, all that, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So it's just Luke and Leia. But in any case, the point is made that that's what balance ends up looking like. And then in the later movies, in the sequels, we get this idea: powerful light, powerful dark, right? Darkness rises and light to meet it. Like it's said multiple times throughout those first two movies, and then nobody says anything about it in the third movie for some reason. Almost like there was a thematic through line in those first two that just got dropped, and I'm not sure why. But you know, had they carried that through, I think that Rey's decision at the end with Palpatine would have looked very different, and perhaps instead of destroying him, man, this drives me nuts. What new force power does she exhibit at the beginning of the film?
The Force lightning.
No, the ability to heal.
Oh yes, sorry.
Right? We've never seen this before. We
It's been
saw it.
3 years
Yeah,
since
we
I've seen
saw
it.
it the night before on Mandalorian, and then we see it in the Rise of Skywalker. Right? It's
Right,
like
right.
that same week we get to see it twice. We've never seen it before, but she has this ability to heal. Right? That it's just it's never been seen. I mean, we've seen it in video games because we need to be able to heal things in video games, but that's about it. And so the solution at the end of the movie is not to heal Palpatine, which is what she should have done, right? She should have burned away the dark side and restored Sheev to who he was before he fell, right? Like that's what should have happened. But instead, you know, we get what we get. But that's the, and that like would have brought an end to all of it. I mean, like I look at you know what's the perfect ending for a story like this is Avatar: The Last Airbender. To me, that's what they should have done at the end of Rise of Skywalker, is that she should have used her healing powers to heal him so that he no longer has this lust for eternal life, to heal him, and then just like take away the force. Just turn it off for him. Just be like, you are now a normal man and you have a second chance. And then like that's it. Like and then Ben can live, and it's like, and he gets a second chance as well, and all of that. And it's like that would have been, because that's like restorative, right? Like that would have actually meant something as opposed to what we got. But like the Obi-Wan series gets that, right? And that's why it's not just a fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan in the next episode. It is, you know, like there's emotional content there. And Obi-Wan leaves him not because the story dictates or the plot dictates it. Obi-Wan leaves him because the Force has other plans for Vader. And in order for the galaxy to be healed, Luke and Vader have to have their confrontation. It has to happen, right? It has to happen the way that it happens, and that's how they'll defeat the Emperor. I think that that's what Obi-Wan sees. And again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about this next week, but that all ties into, like I said, it's a reflection of Vader's decision here. Obi-Wan sees very clearly in the next episode the path that destroying Vader leads to, right? Obi-Wan destroys Vader. Palpatine finds a new apprentice. That's it. He finds a new apprentice and he continues, right? But there is a path through Luke and Leia where it all can end. And Obi-Wan doesn't know what's going to happen, obviously, because things that he says in Empire and Jedi don't line up with him knowing how this is going to end. But I
Right.
think that he senses in the Force that the living Force communicates to him, don't if you kill Vader here, then you lose what makes you a Jedi. and the dark side wins, right? And he doesn't. I don't know that he fully understands that at the in that moment, but he knows that it's not his role, right? And so I think like then, ultimately Luke bringing Vader back from the dark side and Vader sacrificing himself to destroy the Emperor has even more meaning as a result of Obi-Wan choosing not to go down that path, right? And kill his friend. Which is not the decision that he made previously. The decision that he made previously on Mustafar is much more similar to the decision that Vader makes on Jabim with Reva, right? Of like, no, he killed Anakin. As far as he was concerned, he killed Anakin. Chopped off his legs, chopped off his arm, left him to burn. Like the dude was cooking when he left him. And he said it. He said, don't do it. And what he was really saying was, don't make me do this. Right? Like this is literally the last chance. Stop. And don't make me destroy you. I'll do what I must, right? Like just like all of this stuff, like it all kind of comes back in the next episode, but it's all tied in. So yeah, I don't know if I made any sense in all of that. I said a lot of stuff, I feel like, but I don't know if I really made my point. But to me, that's why it's never bothered me, because I just look at Vader and the Grand Inquisitor and their arrogance and their cockiness and self-assuredness, and I'm like, no, that tracks for me. That's exactly how that's supposed to be.
For sure.
They think they're in control, and they think that they've done. They think that they have the thing about the Sith is that they never learn lessons, right? Like they just don't. They make the same mistakes over and over and over again. The rule of two is such a great example of this, where it's always like the rule of two, the rule of two, the rule of two. And then Palpatine's like, yeah, but we also have the Inquisitors. And then Vader's like, but the rule of two is like, actually, the rule of two is exactly why the Sith, like it allowed them to survive undetected, but it was also like the thing that stopped them from gaining power again. And it's ultimately their undoing, because with the rule of two, it's the perfect opportunity for your apprentice to betray you, right? Like you've stopped nothing. All you've done is ensure that the Sith will be destroyed when you eventually destroy each other, right? Like, um, so yeah, it's just it's one of those funny ironies of like, because I like in the Plagueis novel, right? It's his who was Palpatine's master? Palpatine's master was Plagueis.
Plagueis,
Yeah.
yes.
But Plagueis's master was Tenebris, right? And Tenebris has all these plans, and Plagueis is doing all of this stuff, and then Plagueis finds Palpatine, and then uses Palpatine to destroy Tenebris, right? Like that's like, and then and then Palpatine uses Maul, right? Palpatine uses Maul to destroy Plagueis. Like it's just it like it's an unending cycle of betrayal with the Sith. It's been so long since I've read the Darth Plagueis novel. Listen to the audiobook of the Darth Plagueis novel, but I think that's because him like going and getting Maul, all of that happened. Hey, have you read that one?
So I've I've read the Plagueis novel about 3 times, but I've only been able to get like 70 pages in. For some reason, I just can't connect to that novel.
It's a rough one.
Even though
It's
everyone
rough.
loves it. So I've never heard it being rough before for anyone. So yeah, it's difficult for me to kind of get through that one. So I mean, I did a quick little Wikipedia, and like, yes, Darth Tenebris was Plagueis's master, but I've always wanted put it this way. I don't think there's anything canon about Plagueis being immune. I know he is in Legends, but I kind of, there's a part of me that kind of wishes that he wasn't immune. I feel like that design of for the master of Palpatine just doesn't fit for me. I don't know, just visually, and the fact that it's a novel also, I guess it doesn't really matter in a novel too much when it comes to like visual aesthetic. But I never really jived with the whole design of Immune for the master of Palpatine personally. So I
Yeah.
think that's another thing that kind of always kind of bumped with me. But I know broad strokes of it, but I do remember like Maul being more involved, especially in the canon, like comics, for example, leading up to the Phantom Menace. That's basically kind of where I know um, the history when it comes to Palpatine and Plagueis and whatnot.
Yeah. And then Tenebris is a Bith, which is
Yeah, I just
hilarious.
saw that, which is
Like
like
the Grindan, right?
yeah, dude, and
Um,
there's certain I don't know, there's certain designs that I feel like just stick to what they are. That this is what it should be. I mean, I've always felt like the design, and this is going way off topic here, so I apologize in advance. But the Grand Inquisitor design, the Utapowan or the Powans, um, we see a Powan in Revenge of the Sith, and I've always felt like that design should have been maybe a more refined version of what a General Grievous should have been, because that design of what Theomedon looked like in Revenge of the Sith always resonated with me more.
hmm.
And I've always felt like General Grievous should have had that aesthetic with, the cyborg, and body and whatnot. But just I've always felt like that design should have been more of a villain. And then we kind of got that in Rebels with the Grand Inquisitor. So I've kind of like
Yeah.
relaxed on that a little bit. But I've always felt like the Powan was a more striking design visually for like a Sith like villain in Star Wars versus what we ended up getting with like say General Grievous. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, and the choice to make Plagueis immune is an interesting one, because I think they wanted him to specifically be a species that was associated more with like the intellectual side, and then being the banking clan and all that. I think
right, right,
was the idea there, is that it's like, oh no, it's like he's very like, this is the thing about the Sith, is that they're very like planning, right, and that sort of thing. But it's Tenebris being a Bith, just always like, I don't know, it's weird.
yeah,
It's weird. I have a hard time taking a Bith seriously, you know.
yeah. It's
But
like I mean, it's like then the step behind that is like who was Tenebris's master, an Ewok? Like it's like kind of the same track
yeah,
of like um, it doesn't fit for me anyway. But
um, I always, the funny thing is that I always forget that Tenebris is a Bith, and I always in my head, I don't know where I got this visual, but um if you know the character Stinkor from He-Man, he's like a he's like a skunk man, right?
okay,
There's like, I have this weird image in my head of like, because he's got like, Stinkor has like a face mask, like a
hmm,
like a Vader, or like, I mean, like Tenebris has one of these as well. Um but especially like the 2003 He-Man series.
oh wow, yeah,
Uh
I'm looking them up right now.
it, like, I don't know why, but for some reason, like, that version of the character is just like, it, that's what I see Darth Tenebris as, is that head, which looks very alien to me. People can look it up. I literally just googled it to see if this would come up. If you put in 2003 He-Man Stinkor and you look at the first image, or at least the first image that came up for me, you'll see what, like, whenever I think of Darth Tenebris, this is what I see in my head. I
Yeah, I
We're
see it.
so off topic, it's hilarious. But that's, I don't know, I think like that's a cool Sith design, a Sith looking design.
It's like a cat, right? It looks like a cat with a mask and the eyes. So the first image that I saw was a toy of Stinkor because I'm not really into He-Man, and so this is a
Yeah.
completely different world for me. But the first image I see is a like an Amazon picture of him, and the eyes just
You know what he looks like. So
hilarious, dude.
in the 2003 version, what he looks like is he looks kind of like a Mogwai from Gremlins.
I see it.
Because
Yeah. Oh, there
he's
you go.
got
I see it. Yeah.
like the ears, and actually he looks a lot like Stripe from the first Gremlins movie. But he is meant to be like a skunk man,
Yeah.
a stinky skunk man.
So
And the toy actually smelled bad. For those who
really,
were not there in the 80s, or I think it was planned to. I don't know if he actually ended up smelling bad, but that was
oh, no.
definitely like part of was going to be like the gimmick for that toy, was that he smelled bad.
That would have been ambitious.
Now I have to answer this question for myself. Did the Stinkor figure, oh my god, I can't type, actually smell?
While you're doing that, I'm going to say real fast the
Yeah.
the credits, because I don't think we ever got to that. Part 5 for Obi-Wan, directed by Deborah Chow. Writers are Joby Harold, and I wanted to mention this, Andrew Stanton,
Yeah. Um,
the director of John Carter.
Yep, and Finding Nemo. So 3 very wildly different things.
Right.
Yeah, the original Stinkor action figure was chemically treated with patchouli oil to smell musky.
No.
Yeah.
That's completely that just
Yeah, the 80s were a
perfect
wild
80s
time.
thing.
The 80s were a
Yeah.
wild time. So the next time you think of Darth Tenebris, think of that.
He
Anyway,
smells bad. He's a bad.
yeah.
I can't even get the sentence out. Yeah. Anyway, think we did it. What do you think?
Oh yeah, we definitely did it. That's an episode. If we're talking about He-Man action figures and it's an episode about Obi-Wan Kenobi, we're done. We're out of gas, guys. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with our final episode of our Obi-Wan Kenobi retrospective. And then it will be a break, probably until Ahsoka. But really it's not that long. I mean, it'll be about a month between, because this next episode, like our like the final episode of this recap of the Obi-Wan retrospective will come out on like the 11th. So then yeah, we're like a month and a half away from Ahsoka. Can you believe that, man? We're like a month and a half away from Ahsoka.
I cannot wait.
I'm very excited.
It's really
And
the last thing I'm really like looking forward to this year, if I can't remember correctly.
oh really, what about Dune? Oh my god, dude.
Oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, Dune looks great.
Dune Part 2
Dune
looks
does look great.
phenomenal.
Great
Phenomenal.
trailer.
And the Marvels is also in November. We got like
Marvels.
like 1 week after the other with those.
True, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kinda,
Cool. Okay.
yeah. That's about it. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening, and we will be back next week for part 6, our final chapter of Obi-Wan Kenobi. We will see you guys next week. Thank you for listening to Thunderquack Force Perspectives. Our opening theme is composed for us by Christy Carew. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV. And join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network.